Hello everyone, and welcome to your Christmas cookie decorating class. Before we begin, I'd like to suggest you have a few things out. So the first is obviously your Christmas decorating kit. The second is a few squares of paper towel. I like to place the cookie that I'm decorating on a folded piece of paper towel and then also have one off to the side that I can rest my icing bags on so they don't get all over my counter. And the third is your toothpicks from your decorating kit so that you can smooth out any icing if you need to. The first cookie we're going to be starting with is your pine cookie. So I'd like you to place that on whatever surface you're decorating on. And the first thing we're going to do is take your smaller bag of white icing, which is your outline icing. It's a stiffer consistency, and I'd like you to point it on the cookie just above where you want it to start. Give it a little squeeze, and then you should be able to lift it as you gently trace the outline of the cookie surface. So you just kind of follow the outline of the cookie itself, and you just keep squeezing as you're lifting the icing bag and tracing the outline of the cookie itself. Don't worry if it's not perfect, you can go back in and touch up these lines at the end. That's what I like to do. So I just try to trace the entire outline of the one cookie, and then I can go back and fix any of the lines after. So you'll see me do that in the video as well. And then for your flood, I'd like you to pick up the larger bag of white icing that is more liquid, and you just again start on the edges and then work to the middle. So start where you want your flood to start, start squeezing, and then trace again the outline of the cookie itself, and then work your way to the middle. Sometimes I like to flood section by section if it's a larger cookie, and sometimes I like to do the whole outline of the cookie and then work my way to the middle. It just kind of depends on what I feel like will work. So with this, I'm starting to flood from the bottom to the top and then just kind of adding in the sections as I go. And while you're flooding, make sure that you are attempting to mostly flood the cookie evenly so that there aren't any sections that are really full and sections that don't have a lot of icing, because it'll make it hard for it to smooth itself over. And then once you're done with flooding your cookie, you can set it off to the side. I like to just pick up the paper towel and move the cookie itself rather than trying to handle the cookie while it's all wet and risk ruining it. And then I'd like you to take the heart cookie and get that ready for decorating. So again, we have our outline icing, so the smaller bag of white icing, and I've started at the bottom of the heart and just gave it a little squeeze and then traced out the outline of the heart. And then again, take your larger bag of white icing and then go around the edges of the cookie to flood it, and then work your way to the middle. You're going to want to move at a good pace for this section, because to do the plaid, we're doing a technique called wet on wet, which means that the bottom of the cookie that we're flooding right now needs to be wet in order to do the plaid and have it kind of sink back into the background. We don't want it to dry start to dry before we do that. Otherwise, our plaid lines will sit on top of the cookie. So then after you're done flooding it, take your red bag of icing, and you just want to start to the side of the cookie and give it a little squeeze and make your line while you're lifting your icing bag gently. Try and make your lines as parallel as possible. And we're going to do the horizontal lines and then the vertical lines, and then go back in with our green icing. So we're going to do all of the red lines horizontally and vertically, and then go back in with our green icing to make the plaid effect. There are a few things that I learned while filming my first decorating class. One of them is to make sure that your phone has enough storage. Otherwise, it'll tell you it's filming when it's not actually filming. So it missed the little section of doing the green, but it's the exact same idea, where you pick like the top or the bottom underneath the red lines, and just make your green lines parallel with your red lines, and do that for the horizontal and the vertical lines, and then your plaid will be done. And then we're done the heart cookie, so you can put that off to the side and then grab your gingerbread man. And for your gingerbread man, you're going to want to start with the smaller bag of your tan icing, and again trace the outline of your gingerbread man. He's a little bit more complicated, I would say, than the other two. So I like to start where there's a little like a crease or like a corner and that sort of thing, and then do my little loop for the outline and then end it, and then start again on every kind of new section. I find that easier for more precise outlines such as this. Rather than trying to do the whole thing in one go, I start and do it kind of in sections. And then we're going to flood him the same way that we flooded the other two. I actually started from one side. So I did the outline of one side and then I started to flood it and then continued on just because I felt like he was a larger cookie that I didn't want the flood to start to crust over before I could get to it. And again, just try to make sure that your flood is even. There's not like lots of dips the icing as well so that it has a chance to easily flatten out. And then again, while it's still wet, you want to go in with your red icing and make the little blushing cheeks. So you just do two small little circles for his little blushing cheeks while it's still wet into the flood that we've just done. And then you're going to want to put your gingerbread man off to the side and then pick up your pine branch and we'll move forward with decorating that. For your pine branch, you want to have your smaller bag of tan icing and we're going to make the stem of the branch. So I started at the bottom of the cookie and I squeezed a little bit to have the icing come out, lifted my piping bag and then traced where I wanted the stem to be. So just very slowly, you just kind of drag it up and then end it where you want your branches to start for your pine tree. And then take your green icing and make the pine needles. So I do them at different lengths and some of them go near the end, some of them kind of end closer to the middle of the cookie and just kind of overlap them until you get the effect that you're happy with. You can use your toothpick at this point to touch up any of the ends of the needles as well if you're unhappy with how they look or if they curl or something like that. If you find that your icing is curling at this stage, you can also cut a slightly larger hole than you have been using, and that should solve that problem. And then after we're done with our pine branch, you can pick up your gingerbread person and take your red icing, and then you're just going to place it where you want his button to be. And basically just squeeze it until you get the size of button that you're happy with and then go in and do the same thing. I used the flood icing for the white icing, so the larger bag to make the button because it will self-settle, and then your green icing. And then I went back and I adjusted my red button because I found that it wasn't as big as the other two. So as long as it hasn't started to crust over, you can go back in and kind of tweak your buttons as well to make sure that they're as symmetrical as you want them to be. And then take your black icing, eyeball where you want the eyes to be and just give it a little squeeze and you should get the eyes as little dots. And then again, start the smile where you want the smile to start and then just pull the icing where you want it to be. And then for the little white ribbons on his arms and his feet, I just, again, put the icing tip where I wanted it to start and then basically moved it left to right to make the ripple effect or the wave effect on his body. I added in a little ripple on his forehead because I just like how that looks. And with that, we are done. Thank you so much for following along as we decorated these cookies together, and I hope you had as much fun following this tutorial as I did putting it together for you. As this is my first time putting together something like this, I would love your feedback on how you thought it was, and I look forward to doing more of these. Merry Christmas!